I found her standing in my driveway with my router held like a trophy. The whole block watched. That's when I understood this wasn't about bandwidth anymore. My name is Eli Mercer, and I pay for the internet that runs down our street. I tell you that because it matters in small towns and new developments. The line between neighborliness and entitlement is thinner than you think. For months I'd let people hop on. A little password here, a favor there. You tell yourself it's neighborly, until it becomes assumed, until your kindness is treated like an open tap. Dana and Lila Harper moved in 2 years ago, the kind of new neighbors who arrive with plants and opinions. Dana wore bright earrings and smiled like she already owned the block. Lila kept quiet at first, a small smile that would curve into sass when she wanted it to. They borrowed a ladder. They accidentally left their fence tools in my garage. At first it was small inconveniences, the kind you laugh off, then later stack up into a narrative you didn't choose. One rainy Tuesday night, I checked the router because my teen nephew's gaming session was lagging. 3 unfamiliar devices were logged in. I changed the password and went to bed thinking it solved a problem. The next morning, Dana stood at the end of my driveway, hands on hips, my router wrapped in a dish towel. She held it aloft like a flag and said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, "We were cut off. Someone's being mean." My jaw tightened. I could have walked out, retrieved the router, and shut the door, but that would have been a different story. Instead, I filmed Dana through the window and sent the footage to a neighbor group chat. That clip would become more important than I'd guessed. Dana and Lila turned the moment into theater yard signs painted with accusatory slogans, whispered versions of their story at the corner market, a flood of dramatic posts on the neighborhood app. They had lines and faces honed for sympathy. It was relentless, and it started to shift the street's mood. The HOA called a meeting to restore harmony. I went because that's what neighbors do when the community asks. Dana spoke about rights and shared access, as if there were an entitlement clause in the bylaws. Lila played the hurt sister with practiced inhalations, and the room shifted toward them. Someone suggested I should just share the password for peace. In the hallway outside, a woman patted Dana's shoulder and said, "You're so brave to stand up." Brave. The word made me laugh, a small, bitter sound in my throat. I decided to avoid public theatrics and gather facts. I collected screenshots of posts, timestamps of repeated logins, a list of device names that kept appearing on my network. When Lila accused me of theft and called the police, the officers asked for proof of ownership. I had a bill in my name. I showed it. Dana's face, when she realized the router wasn't anonymous, was a tiny, stunned thing like a mask flicking. The sisters kept pushing. They held a watch party outside their house when, conveniently, they experienced outages, inviting guests and cameras. People love a spectacle. Some of my neighbors cheered, others just wanted entertainment. The sisters used social capital like currency. The more attention, the more they leaned into stories of marginalization. My attempts to explain boundaries became part of their narrative of mean neighbor versus the community. I won't lie, I retaliated. I changed the Netflix password to something they couldn't guess. I renamed my Wi-Fi to a series of messages that pulled at the sting. Be kind, ask first. No free riding. Small, childish things, but satisfying in a way that surprised me. A friend texted, "Classic payback," with laughing emojis. In the morning, someone posted a screenshot of my new network name and tagged me with a winky face. The joke spread. For a while, the imbalance felt corrected. Then came the real cracks. The night of their big movie night, friends shuffled in with food and expectations. Instead of a movie, the TV displayed a loading circle that refused to commit. Phones exchanged glances. Someone muttered, "Is it the router?" Dana's face collapsed into fury so full it looked theatrical, she swept a lamp aside, and it crashed. Glass and a lampshade spun like confetti. A neighbor across the street recorded the entire scene and posted it. The clip went around fast, and not in the way she wanted. After that, things turned meaner. Trash cans were tipped over outside my place, a slur sprayed on a mailbox, a potato nailed to my fence like a juvenile trophy. My car appeared with fine, shallow scratches along a door where you'd notice at a family gathering. I filed a police report. They came, took notes, and said the usual. "We'll look into it." It was the kind of answer that feels procedural, a small offer of help in a neighborhood that had turned its attention elsewhere. I kept the receipts on an old USB drive, printed pages of posts and timestamps, video files, and witness statements. I compiled them into a folder and asked the HOA for another meeting. Not to shout, not to beg, but to show facts. Evidence, neatly arranged, has a way of making things less theater and more truth. At the meeting, Lila tried to interrupt. Dana pushed her hand insistently, and a hush fell. I asked for 3 minutes. I spoke calmly, not to preach, but to explain about consent and boundaries, about how small violations erode trust. I showed the device list with names and times. I displayed the police report for the vandalism. I walked them through the timeline like a detective laying out clues. For every flamboyant post the sisters made, I had a timestamp. When I finished, the chair of the HOA cleared her throat and said, "We didn't realize this had escalated so far." People who'd laughed before looked sheepish. A couple stood and quietly apologized. The sisters left the room pale and tight. It wasn't dramatic in a cinematic sense, no handcuffs, no arrests, but the social applause that had fueled their story faded. Signs came down over the next week. The feed of dramatic posts slowed, and the watch party stopped. Even so, the aftermath is not tidy. In the weeks that followed, I caught myself reading messages with a sharper edge, retorting in group texts I would once have shrugged off. Revenge is a subtle thing. It sandpapers the edges of your instincts until you notice the grit. Sometimes at night, I sat on my porch thinking about the neighbor I used to be, the one who lent out a ladder without a ledger. There is a cost to fighting back, even when the fight is justified. But there's also a relief in boundaries being respected. When my stream worked, when my router sat undisturbed, I felt a small, domestic peace. The petty retaliations stopped feeding the story. Neighbors who'd been neutral started coming by to borrow tools, to ask for advice on lawn care, small reconciliations. I accepted them, cautiously. A councilwoman once told me, "Communities survive on small courtesies," and I realized she was right. The quiet ballet of give and take is what keeps a street from unraveling. A week after the HOA meeting, someone keyed Dana's car in a place that would be noticed at a family event. Rumor said it was payback, though I can't prove it. Lila shifted her garden gnome to face the street in a way that felt like a tiny, rebellious salute. These are the loose ends a story like this leaves behind, unresolved, slightly bitter threads that keep neighbors talking. So what do you think? Was I a reasonable man standing up for his privacy? Or did I become a social prosecutor, stacking evidence to shame two people who only wanted attention? Were Dana and Lila victims of a neighbor who wouldn't share, or were they playing roles until the applause died? I want to know how you'd have handled it. Be honest in the comments, tell the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. If you've been through something similar, tell us what worked, what failed, what you regret. Because in the end, it's not just a router. It's a story about how we choose to live together, about the lines we draw, the respect we demand, and the small mercies that keep mornings quiet and streets friendly. Share this if it made you think, and tell us where you stand. Justice or just drama?